Hey everyone, Matt Williamson here. As you know, you tuned in. Thank you for doing that. This episode is brought to you by Live Casino. You know what time it is? It's time for football and time to jump into the action at FanDuel Sportsbook and lounge at Live Casino. Bet on your favorite teams at our self-service kiosks and sit back and watch the players duke it out on the field on our massive 40-foot video wall. Bet, watch, and win at Live Casino Pittsburgh, Route 30 at the Westmoreland Mall. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. And as we've been doing on game week, I've started my Matt stats, digging into the opponent here. Let's do the first segment, just what I'm going to call general, some things about Steelers and their opponent. And I'm about halfway through the stats, but you're going to get the idea here pretty quick that the Buffalo Bills are a really good football team on both sides of the ball. I really think that they stand with the Chiefs and Eagles as what I would call the elite tier of the NFL right now. It's those three teams. The Bills have outscored their opponents this year by 56 points, despite having a loss. Steelers have been outscored by 16 points through 4 games, which, to be honest, probably isn't as bad as you thought. One of those was a late touchdown against the Browns that really didn't mean anything. So a lot of tight one-score games. As bad as the Steelers have played overall, being outscored by only 16 points through 4 games isn't that awful to me. I'm a big yards per play guy. Bills' offense is at 6-point even yards per play. That's compared to the Steelers' offense. It's at 4.8. The Bills' defense gives up only 4.2 yards per play, and the Steelers' defense only gives up 5.1 yards per play, which isn't as bad as you think either. Some of the defensive numbers that we'll get into for the Steelers aren't as nasty as many of you probably think. Although they won 11 regular season games last year, they were only 6-3 at home, including losing to the Steelers on opening day. So they were not a dominant team at home. So Bills and Steelers have each given the ball away 7 times thus far this year. And some of those are Hail Marys, as you know, but you can get the ball from the Bills. Protecting the football should be a point of emphasis for Buffalo, and they haven't been great at it. The Bills are converting 55.8 of their third down attempts, while their opponents are only converting 41.3. I'm almost sure that's the biggest discrepancy in Buffalo's favor in the league. Meanwhile, Steelers' offense is converting just 37% of their third down tries. That's really bad. But the Steelers' defense is allowing only 45% success rate on third downs. Pretty darn good. Again, the Steelers' defensive numbers aren't as bad as you think. Pittsburgh has 97 rushing attempts this year. Their opponents have run the ball 132 times. It's a bad formula. This is a big Bill Parcells thing. He was really big in combining rush attempts and completions. And when you do that, because the reason behind it is if you have a high number of rush attempts and completions, you're controlling the flow of the game. You're controlling time of possession, most likely. You're dictating to your opponent. So when you combine rushing attempts and completions, the Steelers are behind their opponents this year 226 to 176. That is a big discrepancy. Buffalo, on the other hand, has 210 combined rushes and completions, and they don't run the ball very much, so this stat doesn't really favor them. But their opponents only have 169. So a big dip in their favor, too, as most of these Bills stats are. The Steelers' opponent, this one startles me, and the Steelers' opponents are producing 107.5 yards, 107.5 yards per game than the Steelers are. So the average Steeler game, they're getting outproduced in yardage by over 107 yards. The Bills, on the other hand, their average game, they outproduce their opponent in yardage by 165.3. Wow. I'm a big time of possession guy as well, especially once you get deep into the league. The Steelers are 31st in time of possession at 25.42 per game, but they were much worse a week ago. They've gone up about a minute and a half on average, after having a decent game in time of possession. Buffalo, on the other hand, is 9th. They're right over 31. They're not a real ball control type of team. This is remarkable to me and really shows halftime adjustments that the Bills so far or traditionally have to be at the best in the league at this. I mean, in the third quarter, they haven't allowed a point in the third quarter, and they've scored 44. I mean, so they're making big time adjustments on both sides of the ball, and it's showing up in a big way. So, I mean, they've outscored their opponents 44-0 in the third quarter through 4 games. I mean, that's an 11-point swing per game. So, some big things there, obviously. Nothing's mind-boggling or too startling. You know, I mean, the Bills are good. Steelers are struggling. When we come back, we will emphasize when the Steelers have the ball. So last week, I think you'll like hearing this. And oh, by the way, my article for the week is up on DK Pittsburgh Sports. It's focusing on Pickett, of course, but also kind of a deeper view. You know, these next 4 daunting games that everyone's so afraid of, and the bye, and what things look like. Big picture for the rest of the year. Go check that out. Speaking of Pickett. When he was in the game last week, the Steelers averaged 5.7 yards per play. When Trubisky was in, they averaged 4.1. So it was a noticeable difference. I mean, in his first start. Against the Jets, George Pickens' average depth of target was 20 yards downfield. And he was targeted on 31% of his dropbacks. So he was targeted a lot, and he was targeted deep. Finished the day 6 for 102, as you probably know. But 71 of those came in the second half with Pickett at quarterback. Pickens averaged an unbelievable 5.9 yards per route run in the second half. And over the first 3 weeks, Pickens was targeted on 13% of his dropbacks. But in this one, he was targeted on 31. So I think a breakout player is very much on the horizon, with Pickett throwing to Pickens, which is hard to say, and, you know, we all make jokes. The Bills held Lamar Jackson to only 144 yards through the air last week. They're a really hard team to throw on. But the Ravens ran for 162 against Buffalo. But for the season, the Bills are still only allowing 3.5 yards per carry, which is 4th best in the league. Last week was much more of a Najee Harris emphasized game. They've been pretty much having a 2-to-1 split in snap counts, but last week Harris outsnapped Warren 48-16. Mentioned some turnovers earlier. The Bills' defense has already taken the ball away 9 times through 4 games, so over 2 a game. And their great safety, Jordan Poyer, he leads the NFL with 4 interceptions, so somebody to worry about. One of the real strengths of this defense is the Bills' defensive line. It is so deep. And go check out drafthistory.com and look at all the early picks they've used on defensive linemen. And I'm talking about edge guys and interior, you know, Ed Oliver, Rousseau. And then they go out and they sign Von Miller this year, just kind of the sugar on top, who I think is really the mentor for all those young, talented dudes, but he's also still really good. And more than just about any team in the league, them and the Niners, I would say, they have hockey lines. I mean, 8 guys that can just be shoveled in and out like hockey lines on that defensive front, which I love. I mean, that's one of my favorite things. When in doubt, add another defensive lineman. But here's to give you an idea of that. Last week, they had 9 different defensive linemen of all shapes and sizes play between 19 and 49 snaps. Nobody's playing a ton of snaps and wearing down, but a lot of them are getting in there often. And then this is crazy. None of the Bills' defensive linemen have played more than 157 of a possible 236 snaps, and 9 linemen have played more than 60. So really, they go 9 deep on a 4-man front of high-quality dudes of all shapes and sizes. I mentioned the Niners before. They're one of the few teams that have a lot of their defensive numbers are comparable or better than the Bills. And if you watch that game Monday night, you can understand why. We're not talking about the Niners, though. Anyway, we got off track there. But I mentioned that because San Francisco is the only defense in the league that create a sack at a higher percentage of opposing dropbacks than Buffalo. So every time quarterbacks drop back against the Bills, they get sacked over 10% of the time. It's pretty darn good. And they're the only two teams in the league over 10%. The Bills' defense is tied with San Francisco in giving up the fewest yards per game. They are both only allowing 234.5. To give you some perspective, I mean, like I said, these guys are giving up over 234 a game. The Eagles are third best, and they give up 277. So by a wide margin, the Bills and Niners are giving up the fewest yards per game. Here's the last one I have for you, and we'll wrap this thing up. We'll talk when the Bills have the ball tomorrow, which is equally as scary. I think I've mentioned that I'm a big EPA per play fan. I'm getting more and more into that stat and believe in it more and more. The only defense that is above Buffalo in EPA per play, you guessed it, the Niners. And on the other side of the ball, the Steelers' offense is 27th in EPA per play. Not ideal. A huge discrepancy in Buffalo's favor, as much of this game is, and I'm sure many of you will understand that. Again, check out my article. It might make you feel a little better about where the team is at. It's not a puff piece or anything like that. It's just good analysis, and let me know what you think about it. That is a wrap. Take care.